Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG Podcast. I am Ramon Mejia here to bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and of course author interviews. And this week I have for you 8 new LitRPG reviews. And don't forget that we have this last week we released the author interview with Michael Chatfield about the last book in the Amaryllis series and all the things associated with that ending of that particular series. So go check that out on our website. The new releases and reviews for this week, though, are going to begin with Space Knights, Book 2. Then we're going to move on to War of Aeternus, the beginning. Then on to Dungeon Lord, and then the Beatdown. After that, it'll be the Nightmare Game Slayers. After that, it'll be Underworld, Level Up or Die. And then after that, it'll be On My Brother's Grave, Reconnaissance. And last but not least, it'll be Black Hat, Afterlife Online, Book 2. So there we go. And of course, we'll begin the show, though, with LitRPG News. And in LitRPG News, we begin with the some very interesting, nice stories. Here we are. The final Amaryllis book, again, is going to be out on December the 5th of next month, December. However, if you can't wait that long, you can actually get the first 14 chapters of the last book on the author's Patreon page at patreon.com. Michael Chatfield writes. So, like I said, always happy to support an author's Patreon page if you guys want to. But of course, you are also getting a look at that next book well in advance of it actually coming out, but be aware that it might be the rough version of it, so just FYI. In other Patreon news, of course, we also have Blaze Corbin, author of the Delvers LLC series and Secret of the Old Ones. He's actually decided to write a series of articles over the next couple months, a weekly article, I believe it is, sharing his own writing advice. He's a best-selling author. He has doing really well with his writing, so if anyone's going to be qualified to give you advice, it's somebody who's actually making sales. So this is good stuff, I hope. He'll be writing weekly articles on his Patreon page, available to subscribers. I think they open at the $4 a month level, detailing quote-unquote hard-won knowledge about the current state of indie promotion venues, how to market, and what some of his background opinions / dirt are on certain websites that supposedly cater to indies. So lots of good information there, hopefully. I definitely have to check out the articles myself. Okay, also, in more LitRPG news, awards. Apparently, it's award season for a lot of things, including Goodreads. It's time for the Goodreads Yearly Choice Awards, and one of our own, Alrong Hung, has a book that has been nominated for the Best Fantasy category of 2017. He's going up against 19 other amazing novels, including ones written by Patricia Briggs, Neil Gaiman, Brandon Sanderson, and Hannah Williams, just to name a few of the authors who are in this category. But he's the only LitRPG story there. So these awards are entirely based on reader votes. So if you want to vote for him, we'll have a link in the show notes for you. Or you can go search for Goodreads Best Fantasy category on the Goodreads Choice Awards. So go check that out if you're so inclined. And that's it for LitRPG News. Only a couple stories. Out now. These are stories that are out currently. Haven't had a chance to read or review them, but they do say they're LitRPG. So including Desertborn, Paternia Online by Don Chapman, rather. Also out is Dawn of the Realms by Steele Mims. This is the Realm of the Mordred Book 1. And Steele Alchemist by Deck Davis. Also out is Deadly Realms Fighting Freedom by Ryan Decker. So another Decker. And of course, Rules-Free VRMMO Life. This is book 7 in the series, called The Tribeslands by Stuart Gross. I'm not going to be reviewing this book. It's just has content that I didn't care for. If you listen to the podcast before, you can, I'm referring to, but I always make sure to tell you about these stories, even if I'm not going to review them, because I know some people do truly enjoy his writing. And Stuart Gross is a good writer. He has really good game mechanics and all the stuff I've ever read of his. So I always want to make sure you guys know about the stuff, even if I'm not going to review it. And he also has a omnibus for volumes 1 volumes 1 through 4 put together. So if you want to get into the series, that is a cheaper alternative. Okay, so out in new audiobooks, we have The Bard by Galen Wolfe, narrated by Damien Albums. It's out currently. Also, we have Enter the Realm, written by Timothy W. Long, narrated by Todd Menences. And, of course, Delvers LLC, Venture Capital, written by Blaze Corver and read by Jeff Hayes, both friends of the podcast. This one just came out, so the fact that the audiobook is also out is a good testament to the hard work of both of those folks. And last but not least, we have Cosmo Yaps The Game. This is the second book in the series, entitled Earth's Gambit. Definitely a favorite of mine. And okay, for all these audiobooks, we have links in the show notes for our reviews of the ebook versions of them. But of course, go check them out for yourself. There are samples online at Audible and, of course, Amazon for the narrators' voices, because that's a really big component of the audiobook enjoyment process. Okay, we have 6 new listens to the upcoming LitRPG list. This is just where I read off to you the stuff that I know that's coming out, either from Amazon or from the authors themselves. So I'll be reading them off to you. Of course, skip ahead if you don't want to listen to them again. We have some new listings in this selection. Okay, on November 15th, not too far from now, we have Dungeon Calamity, The Divine Dungeon Book 3 coming out. Also on the 15th, Bloody Crucible Lone Wolf. On the 16th of November to be Shatterlands Book 3. On the 17th of November, Skylar grants The Airship, which is the Laboratory Book 2 of the Futuristic Dungeon Core series. On the 19th, the long-awaited 7th book in the Chaos Seat series, written by Alaron Kong, entitled Predators. And on the November the 20th, it is Under the Black Flag. This is again a newer listing. This is book 6 in the Feral series. We finally got some artwork from them for that. It is up for pre-order. November 22nd, Eden's Gate, book 3, The Sands. We have book 2 in the Armored Soul series, The Wounded Legion. This is a mech LitRPG out on November the 23rd. On the 25th of November, Know Thy Enemy. This is a collaborative piece between Don Chapman and Mats Faraz. On the 29th of November, we'll have the 3rd book in the Weirdest Noob series called The Gods of the Second World. On November 30th, we'll have the 2nd book in the Daggerland Online series called Infinite Assassins. The Slime Dungeon Chronicles book 4 will be out according to the author on December the 1st, if everything goes okay. He's currently doing, believe editing on that one. On the December 4th, it'll be The Twilight Obelisk, Mirror World book 4 will be out. And Memoria book 11, the final book in that series. I can finally tell you guys, I've known it for a little while, but the author, since we had the author interview, he told me it's okay to say it. It will be out December the 5th, 2017. So I don't have cover art for that yet, but it'll be out on December the 5th. And then also Don Chapman's 3rd book in the Puatera Online series, Desert Storm, will be out on December the 13th. And this one's also new. The 3rd book in the Dark Herbalist series, a favorite of mine, will be out on January the 17th, 2018. It is January of next year, but again, it's not that far. I keep forgetting how close we are to the end of the year. It'll be titled A Trap for the Potentate. I'm not sure what that word means. I'll look it up later. Also out on the 24th of January, it'll be The Reapers, the Neuro book number 3. So there you go. Those are all the upcoming LitRPG. On to new releases and reviews. Okay, our first book in the new releases and reviews is going to be Space Knights Book 2, written by Samuel E. Green and Michael Scott Earl. Michael Scott Earl is the author of the Lion's Quest series, which is very much a LitRPG series. And this one's coming up because it unfortunately is not LitRPG. And that makes me super sad because I read the book, really enjoyed it, but as I generally do, I have to apply the same LitRPG standards, like what is and what is not LitRPG, across the boards, even if I really enjoyed the book and I like the author. And this one just did not cut the mustard for me. I'll redo the author description. It is 579 pages, $4.99, available on Kindle Unlimited, which is great. And honestly, I wasn't sure if I was going to review this after all, because when I looked back on it, the Amazon description does not mention the novel as being LitRPG. It's actually doing really well in a couple of categories, including like colonization, space opera, and like something else, but nothing like related to games or LitRPG at all. And this one, again, does not have anything in the novel description saying anything about LitRPG. But what really kind of cinched it for me is the fact that this novel and book one are both advertised on LitRPG groups on Facebook. And so the fact that they're there and being advertised kind of tells me, okay, that at least the author is showing the readers in the LitRPG groups, like, this is my book, it's out now. And so for me, that at least qualifies it for a review to see if it actually is LitRPG, because by placing it there, by showing, announcing it, and staying in the groups, you're kind of saying it is, at least to me. And so for folks who are unaware, book one was definitely LitRPG in the novel. It had some really interesting game mechanics. It turned enemy weapons. The main character could turn enemy weapons into kingdom points, which is kind of the RPG currency, as I saw it. Basically, the use of the KP, or the currency kingdom points, could be used to upgrade the character's gear, the character's magical effects on that gear, buy new stuff entirely, or use it to increase the character's rank, which is where that RPG progression kind of comes in for me. Because remember, the two things I look for in LitRPG are, is this a game world or world ruled by game mechanics? LitRPG mechanics, I should say, or RPG mechanics, basically, and make sure that they're obviously stated, they're not hidden away, and two, that the character progresses according to those mechanics. And the first book, like, it was on the lighter side, but it definitely hit those points. And again, there's plenty of stuff there. The main character went from initiate to squire ranking, so there's that progress, and all that other stuff was there. Like, there's a great explanation of like the magic system in that world, the kingdom points, the portals open and monsters come out, which is kind of like a dungeon theme, I guess. And that you could, kill those characters or those creatures and take their gear and turn them in for, kingdom points, which to me was like a version of experience points. But in book two, there are only a very few instances where the main character buys or sells items for KP. And the extent of RPG mechanics are basically item descriptions, and that's it. And even those things aren't a very important part of the story. The fact that the main character gets new powers from these things, yeah, that's part of the story. But the fact that those RPG mechanics are very rarely mentioned is kind of an issue for me. The fact that it's only like 3% of the story, and there is no real progress in the story according to those RPG mechanics, even if you want to call them there, kind of tells me that the focus of this particular story is on futuristic action space stuff. And so it is unfortunate, because I really did enjoy this particular novel. It's really good. It's action filled. And like I said, I like it personally. I really did enjoy the entire novel. It's space action goodness. Unfortunately, it is not LitRPG. And that is unfortunate. I think I've talked to the author about it a couple times, and yeah, it is what it is. It's a collaborative process at this point, so that's fine. It's still doing really well in sales. There's a lot of people who really enjoy it. It's just this one in the series, book two, is not LitRPG, unfortunately, and that it is what it is. So there you go. And again, sad about that in particular. So it gets a score of 4 to 10 as LitRPG. If I was just rating a sci-fi action story, it would get a 7 out of 10. Like I said, it's quite enjoyable. So there you go. Okay, on to our next review, War Aeternus, the beginning, written by Charles Dean, edited by Joshua Swain. Okay, this one is 463 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. I'll read you the author's description. Lee is quiet and unassuming office worker who leads a life of solitude, comfort, and routine. Day in and day out, he shuts off his brain, keeps his head down, and goes about doing his job, minding his own business. That is, he does, until a drunken god shows up randomly one day and whisks him off to another world, demanding that Lee serve as his pawn in a game between the gods. Now trapped in a completely different world full of danger, magic, and creatures he's never imagined outside of a fairy tale and video games, Lee has to figure out how to stay alive long enough to make it back home. So that is the author's description. Now, full disclosure, I did some minor beta reading for the author when he was putting this together. He gives a thanks to me at the back of the book. Additionally, the author names several characters in his stories after LitRPG authors. One of them is me. It's pretty obvious which one is me. It's Ramon. But there are others in there, and I kind of made a game of it. See if you can figure out who all they are. I've read it a couple times, and I've only been able to pick out 4. Some are like really ambiguous, but other ones are like, oh, that is definitely, that's an author. So I come before the author says there are many more than just the 4 that I picked up, though. So there you go. The author. This novel is from the author of the same author who wrote the LitRPG series, the Bathrobe Knight series and the Merchant of Tikba series. Charles Deans really does combine some really good storytelling with an original RPG world full where there are gods that compete for fame and glory by meddling in the lives of us mortals. This was kind of my description of the novel. The latest pawn in the game is Lee, a normal, boring human from our world that's plucked out of his mediocre life and sent to a world ruled by RPG mechanics to get faith points for the god of alcohol and crafting. This is something that's not mentioned on the author description, but I think it's important because some people are offended by religious discussions, and that is a part of the story. While completing some quests for this world, Lee stumbles upon a sinister plot that threatens the people he's come to care about in this RPG world. Will he risk his life and try to help these new friends, or will he try to escape back to his boring, safe life on Earth? So that's basically my description of the novel. And like I said, this is a good action-adventure story. But there's more to it than just that action, which makes it really good to me. There are interesting themes in the novel about what it means to be divine and have faith. Like I said, there are actual discussions and concepts that are a little deeper than you would normally find in other LitRPG novels. But again, that religious discussion will bother some people because it makes, I think part of the author's intention is to make people think and question things potentially, and that makes people uncomfortable. So if you're not somebody who likes to talk about it like politics or like religion, you might want to skip this novel because it might bother you in some places. If you can either skip it or you enjoy that stuff, this is definitely quite a nice book. Late in the story, there are even some other threads about what people would do if they're really given like real actual power. Some subtle threads about the cost of violence on a man's outlook on life. But again, there's still plenty of good old-fashioned fighting, quest solving, XP gaining, skill progression, and humor as well. The game mechanic wise, there's a really great deal of information, and that's kind of the things I kind of advised the author about. In earlier drafts of the novel, there weren't as much, and like I basically pointed out, I want to see more game stuff and more like information about how the game mechanics are, because it turned out that the author was keeping that information. Like he was doing all the number crunching and he was doing a bunch of formulas and a bunch of stat stuff. He just wasn't showing it like an early drafts of the novel. So I'm like, okay, please put that in there. And hopefully people enjoy, the addition of that information. Basically reading like the final finished draft that I purchased from Amazon, I thought, okay, I can actually roll a character in this world. Though I'd like to think I could be a got a coffee and bacon. It's an inside joke. I'd probably end up being something more like a minor spirit of book reviews. So overall, I really did have a fun time reading the story. It was quite highly enjoyable. Gets score 7 out of 10 for me. So there you go. Okay, on to our next review. There you go. Dungeon Lord by Hugo Huesca. This is the first book in the Wrath's Hunt. Okay, this one is 323 pages, $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. I will read you the author's description. Dark forces have extended Edward Wrath an offer of incredible power at a terrible cost, and Edward had chosen to make them regret it. When Edward is swept into the world of Iblis as a dungeon lord, the Dark's most powerful servant, he has no servitude in mind. He'll oppose the evil plans of the Dark God Murmur, whatever it takes. Though only his wits and his guts help him survive in a weakened rival, Edward must rise to power if he is to earn the right to live another day. But in the battle between dark and light, what can Edward choose if both sides are cruel, uncaring monsters? Cold gods laugh in the distant world of Iblis, heroes chase after power and experience, while kings send their armies to their deaths in the name of the dark and the light. But no one expects the rise of a dungeon lord. And in the world of Iblis, maybe a single man can forge his own path. From the title of the story and from sort of the author's description, you would expect this to be essentially a dungeon master story or dungeon core story, as some people call it. What it really is a transport to a game world LitRPG with a light mix of Dungeon Master. And I say really light mix. So don't expect this to be anything like Slime Dungeon Chronicles or the Divine Dungeon series. It isn't. This story basically uses like Dungeon Master powers of like making dungeon traps, things from nowhere basically. And treats them almost like a superpower for the main character. And that superpower is then used by the main character to go out on adventures, help people out, kind of find his way in this world and learn the mechanics of the world, and find the people that oppose him. There's some really interesting story threads in here. It is a good story. I'm just saying that be aware that this is not really a Dungeon Master story, so don't go into expecting it. Otherwise, you're going to be disappointed. Just be aware that there are some Dungeon Master powers, but it basically amounts to being able to make tunnels, summoning like a 1 hit point minion, and making packs with creatures. That's kind of the extent of those powers that you're going to see. And he doesn't really make a dungeon. Like he makes some rooms in a cave, but that's kind of it. Most of the story takes place outside of that, cave dungeon system. There are some very interesting Faustian themes in the story about power corrupting and good people furthering evil causes without them being aware of it. There's also, I have to warn you, there are some very graphic horror scenes from the 70 to 73% mark, like seriously twisted stuff. So be aware of that if you want to skip over it. Or if you like that stuff, hey, go read that many times, I guess. Overall, it's a good action story. The mix of dungeon building powers and adventuring is interesting. But again, don't expect this to be like a dungeon master story, like the Divine Dungeon series or the Slime Dungeon Chronicles. It's different. So there you go. It gets a score of 7 out of 10 for me. I enjoyed it. There you go. Okay, on to number 4, The Beatdown, written by Balogun Ojintadi, a key Khanga novel. Those are some words. I'm probably saying them all incorrectly, but this is from the same author who gave us a very similarly African themed choose your own adventure style novel. That one didn't get a great review because there were a ton of issues in it. You can go check the review on that at our website if you want to. But this one is just a novel. It is not a choose your adventure or I think the author refers to them as game books. It is actually a novel, and there are some good points about it and some not so great ones, but we'll get into that in a second. First, it is 202 pages. It is $2.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. I'll read you the author's description. The coolest video game you'll ever read. A single link never breaks. Ramon Mejia is a martial artist and a fan of the Beatdown, a popular MMORPG set in the fantasy world of Khanga. In the Beatdown, players fight each other in the circles of sand and soil to prevent full-scale wars. Most of this doesn't matter. Players experience every punch, every throw, every kiss, and every sip of honey wine in the Beatdown. Okay, here we go. This is actually part of it. After suffering a brutal assault at the hands of a martial artist champion in the game, Remy decides that to gain closure and empowerment, she must face her attacker in their first professional fight between a man and a woman. Remy, fighting as the single link, because a single link never breaks, becomes a symbol of the people of Khanga, a symbol of courage, of standing against oppression, discrimination, and of freedom. Okay, so this is a description. I'd say some of it is only describes a certain part of the story. Overall, I'm not going to talk about overall yet. The thing that I really did enjoy about the story is the combat. That is definitely a highlight of this novel. It's super detailed, the descriptions and the fight scenes and the moves and just like the shifting of weight and the punches and the throws, like super specific. You can tell if the author has martial arts experience, or did like a ton of research. I'm assuming it's the martial arts experience portion of it. Unfortunately, you only see most of the game mechanics during these fight scenes, but they are consistent through the entire thing. It is absolute LitRPG. There's no question about that. But there is progression again for the character according to the RPG mechanics, so it is absolute RPG. I'd categorize this story in 3 distinct parts. Okay, only one of which is actually any good and worth your time. The first part, the beginning of this novel is setup and a huge info dump. Like the first 18% of the novel is just an info dump about game mechanics and the setup of the next section. And it's honestly hard to get through because it's a lot of tell and very little show. The game mechanics are thoroughly detailed and described. I was just hoping to get more like world building in the introduction of either of the game world or the word is set in 2023 Atlanta, which is the world in the story. But again, I don't really get any good descriptions of either of those settings in the beginning, which is unfortunate because that's one of the things I actually liked about the choose your own adventure story from the author. He detailed some very interesting cultural aspects in that story, and I was hoping he would kind of bring that into the story. He didn't, unfortunately. Additionally, this is probably going to bother a lot of people, or some people I should say. There's a scene where the main character Remy creates her game character, and it seems a little, I'm not going to say maybe patronizing, or I forget the word. Basically, this is a fighting game. It's a one-on-one fighting game. Combat's the focus of it. However, the main character chooses to spend most of her skill points on homemaking skills like sewing, time management, cooking, running errand, and budget finances, which to me doesn't make sense. Story-wise or game mechanic-wise, like I don't get the gamer logic to it. I'm not really sure if the author is trying to feminize the character or what, but it kind of comes off a little bit weird. Just as a point. Additionally, there's a rather brutal rape scene in this novel. It's implied rape, like it basically goes fade to black before anything descriptive happens. Remy, the main character, invites a stranger into her in-game apartment, and he basically just overpowers her, and it's implied rape. Like, they actually say that it's rape, but she's basically raped in a virtual reality game that's supposed to be primarily about solo combat. And it doesn't really click in my brain why that had to be included. I get that the author is establishing motivation for the character and her desire to fight a rapist when she learns who he actually is. He's apparently the champion VR fighter in the game. It's just that it doesn't make sense to me. One, why rape would be allowed in a VR game or any game in the first place, much less having somebody actually have coded it. I suspect that this is part of a true story of empowerment for a woman who went through this situation, because I've done martial arts myself, and this is a story that comes up sometimes. Somebody's assaulted, and they regain a sense of self-control and empowerment through learning how to fight and defend themselves. And that is absolutely a wonderful tale to tell. It's a good story. It's just that in this particular context, it doesn't quite make sense, at least for me. Okay, part 2, Rocky. This is the Rocky section, as I call it. From the 19% mark to the 57% mark, you're going to find actually really decent Rocky-style fighting story with custom RPG mechanics, basically. If Rocky were a woman that got raped and was trying to beat a rapist in a championship fight in a full immersion VR game, instead of trying to send him to jail. But it is an actually decent Rocky style fighting, and I have to give the author credit of combining that kind of story, like the underdog going to take out the champion kind of stuff, with RPG mechanics. So within the section, like I said, it actually is rather decent. There are themes of female empowerment, and women coming into sports and trying to be taken seriously against male opponents and holding their own. All that stuff is there. And like I said, this is probably my favorite section of the story. Again, the Rocky section. After that, though, not so awesome. The rest of the novel, part 3, I'm calling Undisputed, because it feels like a weird take on the movies Undisputed and Van Damme in Hell, which are both stories that include championship fighters being sent to jail and having to participate in underground fight tournaments. And like I said, this is a really weird section. Actually, it was an entirely different novel that was kind of tacked onto it, because the story, only connection the story has to the other parts is the fact that it's the same main character. Basically set years later, it literally says 2 years later in this section, with no explanation. In between, the main character gets stuck in the game, can't log out or she'll die. Also kind of okay. She's sent to an in-game prison where she has to participate in a jailhouse fighting tournament, and she tries to overcome corrupt authoritarian systems. like I said, if you've ever seen the movies Undisputed or VRMMO, this is basically what it is as an RPG. Like I said, the RPG mechanics are there, so and that never shifts. But overall, it was super frustrating. It was not a good read overall. I definitely give the author again points for combining RPG mechanics with that middle rocky fighting story. And if you just want to go look at this book and read that section, great, you might enjoy yourself. But for me, that's the only good part of this entire novel. And again, it's like 30% of the story. The other 70%, not that awesome. I give part 1 4 out of 10. The part 2 section, the rocky section, a 7 out of 10. Like I said, was enjoyable. Even with that, rape theme in there. Part 3, another 4 out of 10. Just like not good at all to me. So I'll give it an average score of 5 out of 10. There you go. The novel on average gets a score of 5 out of 10. Okay, on to number 5. The Nightmare Game, Slayers. Written by S.R. Witt. He's actually an author of a number of LitRPG stories, and his game mechanics are always really super solid and interesting. So I was honestly mixed about reading this particular story. I'll let you know in a second why. It is 326 pages. It is $2.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. I'll read you the author's description. This game has no winners and only survivors. Only one survivor. Chase Harrow's parents have vanished without a trace, thrusting her and her brother into a dangerous quest to find out what happened to them. When the trail leads Chase to a strange town of Crucible, Missouri, what she discovers may destroy her very soul. Trapped in the horrors of the Nightmare Game, Chase must decide whether defeating the monsters who captured her parents is worth becoming a monster herself. The Nightmare Game. Slayers is a perfect read for fans of slasher movies, LitRPG lovers looking for a shot of bloody horror, and fans of terrifying role-playing games of all types. If you've been looking for Ready Player One meets Friday the 13th, this is the book for you. And the author does warn that the novel contains scenes of graphic violence. And I totally agree. This is not for everybody. There are some super, super gory graphic fight scenes in this novel. And honestly, like I said, horror stories aren't my thing. Like I don't like most horror movies. Okay, so right off the bat, this was not really my thing going into it. I'm cool with fantasy horror, like Friday the 13th, or like Nightmare on Elm Street, where the gore is like superficial, that kind of stuff. I am not into some of the more modern horror stories that are just like torture porn. Like Saw or something, where it is just like people hurting people. And I'm like, that is just not entertaining for me, at least. Like, I get that everybody's different. I'm not judging anybody. I'm just saying that kind of stuff is not it for me. So going into this story, I was really hesitant about it. Chase, the main character, takes her wheelchair-bound brother on a road trip to find her missing parents. Their only lead is a creepy game manual someone sent them in the mail, naming a town that can't be found on the map. Yet, the main character finds some way to find it. When she gets there, she discovers that she's trapped in a horror movie-esque murder game and has access to RPG mechanics that let her get stronger the more she murders. That's my description of the novel. And honestly, the first 30% of the novel is all set up. And to me, this, even though there's not like a single graphic murder in this first like 30%, it's the creepiest part of the entire thing. And seriously, it gave me like this Purge vibe. And it almost made me like put the novel down, just like not read it. It really did creep me out. Just because I'm not into that kind of horror movie. Thankfully, I forced myself to continue on, and I found a horror, RPG story more like Nightmare on Elm Street, which I'm really okay with. The game mechanics in the story are really solid. Again, S.R. Witt does a fantastic job in all the novels he's written in the LitRPG community, I should say, of really solid game mechanics. So that wasn't a surprise. Happy to see though. For example, for certain kills, the main character, as a slayer, can take their victim's soul energy and use it to get new powers, upgrade the damage of their chosen weapon or mask, or increase their own stats. Different kinds of monstrous enemies give different amount of soul energy. Also, by using any particular power or special ability, there are finite resources. So when they're used up, there are negative consequences for using those powers, including the death of the character. So there's a nice balance between like having powers and having consequences for using those powers. Like it's a really good RPG mechanic system. Really, really nice to see. However, you don't get to see any of those power things until the 39% mark. That's just the way it is. So if you're if you're looking for it early in the story, push through. If you really want to enjoy it, it gets really good as far as like the RPG stuff after the 38% mark. Let's see. And again, super gory violence. If you like trauma style horror movies, you're going to appreciate the level and type of violence in this novel. I guess most of the rest of the novel is going to be just like combat scene after combat scene, leading to the inevitable conflict with the shadowy instigators behind the horror murder game. The end doesn't really make sense to me, and the epilogue sure as heck doesn't. But that's okay. The reasoning behind most horror movies doesn't make sense either. So it very much is in that horror genre, even with those parts that don't make sense. I'm not a personal fan of horror movies, but I can appreciate how the author incorporates them into the story. So however, if you don't like horror movies, if you don't like graphic violence, gory violence, don't read this. You might actually vomit. I think I did a little bit at some point. But again, like I said, it was an enjoyable story for what it was. People who like horror movies might enjoy it a lot more, actually. But for me, it still gets a score of 7 out of 10. So there you go. Okay, on to our next story review. Underworld, Level Up or Die, written by Apollo's Thorn. Okay, this one is 373 pages. It is $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. I'll read you the author's description. Ilorian has just finished a VR gaming session to find a monster waiting for him. With 19 other students who have also been kidnapped, he is now subject to the whims of a 1,000-year-old succubus and must survive deep under the earth in a lost realm of the underworld. Gifted with the ability to use magic and advance in power, he is given an ultimatum. Level up or die. So there you go. Full disclosure, the author sent me an advance copy for review. I purchased the novel when it was released. Okay, this is basically a daily adventure slice of life story set in an underground fantasy kingdom. Again, Ilorian, the main character, and some other humans are kidnapped, but they're given a chance to leave out their because they're all gamers, their gamer dreams by getting magic and leveling up in an RPG world. Only the boss doesn't really care if they live or not. She's basically just sucking off their magical energy as they level. The main character goes through a series of events that constantly push him and other humans to become more powerful or die. The highlight of the story, for me at least, is definitely traveling with the main character as he gains levels, new blue magic skills, and spells. He's a min-maxer after my own heart, and I thoroughly enjoyed his internal discussions about how to best build his character. He's smart, he gathers plenty of data to figure out the system before committing stat points or energy into leveling skills, and there's quite a bit of character build theorization and details. I really actually enjoyed those parts. I've spent literally like a half an hour just messing around with my stats page of games. I've been playing what's it called, Divinity Original Sin, and number 2, and I can literally just spend hours just changing out the stats, changing out the magic abilities. It's one of those things I do. I enjoy figuring out the best way to build the characters, and that's one of the things I liked about the story a lot, is that the main character does that as well. There's still plenty of action and adventure to be had as the main character fights monsters after monster grinding skills and magic levels. Towards the end, there's even a little bit of town building and crafting. So all kinds of stuff for everybody. The one thing you're not going to find here is kind of a plot. And that's just the nature of these kinds of stories. There are small story character arcs, there's character development, but there's no really big overall coherent plot for the novel other than the vague goals of we have to escape or we have to get stronger. And that doesn't mean it's bad or anything. It's just what it is. That's what slice of life and daily adventure stories are. It's a lot like a TV or an animated series like Dragon Ball Z, a series where there are smaller stories or events that gradually increase in difficulty that challenge the characters to get stronger in this case. That's why I'm comparing it to Dragon Ball Z. But don't expect more than that. And if you don't expect more, and if you accept it for what it is, you'll find a really good story. I liked it a lot. It was quite nice. Additionally, there are, just as to let people know, there are some technical issues, writing issues at the beginning of the novel that might bother some people, like present tense and past tense being in the same sentences, and some rather stilted dialogue in the beginning. But again, it disappears as the novel goes on, as the author kind of finds his writing flow. Additionally, the novel probably goes on a little too long for some people. There's a huge, great climax, it meant, near the end, and it's oh, hey, that was amazing, I'm gonna go to sleep, or but then the story goes on for another 15-20%, and you're I felt like it should have ended a little bit. This also just maybe the writing style for the author, because I think I remember something similar being an issue in like the last story he wrote. But again, it's not bad. It's just like, oh, the end sort of feels like it drags a little bit because, like I said, there's a huge like climax event and like, oh, we're still going and we're going some more. And I was like, okay, it is what it is. Overall, I really did have a good time reading the story. It was a blast. The points I brought up don't really bother me. But I know they are going to bother some people. So it's better from my point of view to let people know about these issues rather than like surprising them as they're reading it and then having them complain later. 'Cause this way, if they know about it, they're forewarned that they may or may not enjoy it because of these things. But for me, I had a good time with it. And just on a personal note, I totally agree with the stories, themes, and points of views that Bacon and Ranch are highlights of a good life. I had Bacon and Ranch is in that thing behind me, like a lot of it. So there you go. For me, it gets a score of 7 out of 10. 7 out of 10. So there you go. On to our next review, which is going to be On My Brother's Grave, Reconnaissance, a LitRPG adventure. Vatenkeist Online, Book 1. That's all on the title, folks. It is written by E.M. Hardy. So there you go. This one is 219 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. I'll tell you right off the bat, the cover art for this thing, pretty nice. I like the themes. I like the stuff in there. Unfortunately, I can't say the same for the novel. I'll read you the author's description. You know what? I'm not going to read you the description. It's really long and doesn't hit all the points. I'll read you my description. Corb, the main character, a real-life paid assassin working for the police, gets a mysterious message from his brother one day. When he arrives home, he finds that his brother has hung himself. In a note he left for his brother, he points at being bullied and humiliated by friends he made in a virtual reality game he played as the cause for his suicide. Suspecting foul play, the main character logs into this virtual reality world and creates his own character, a human hunter, planning to ruin the guild that he suspects killed his brother. So there you go. That is essentially what the premise of the novel is. And overall, the story is kind of a mixed bag. There are some places, so a lot of the story is kind of mediocre. There are a few quests and ideas here that are really interesting, but most of the story is kind of annoying and frustrating. And it's mostly because the story breaks its own rules, and the main character does things that just don't make sense. The beginning of the story, of course, sets up Corb, the main character, as a real-life paid assassin working for the police. Cool. He gets a mysterious message from his brother. He races home. He finds his brother's hung himself. Fine. He logs in a game to get revenge or to find out who may have hurt his brother. Fine. And this is just one of those things, though. From the 1% mark to the 41% mark, from the 1 to 41% mark of the story is halfway decent. The main character learns about game mechanics. He goes on several quests. He gets to level 3 and he stays there for the rest of the story. And again, there's several interesting betrayals that show the main character, so that the NPCs and the players can exploit players equally. I thought that was kind of an interesting aspect of it. However, from then on in, it's sort of a mess in a lot of ways. At about the 53% mark, the story just takes this weird turn. It goes from a fantasy setting to like a turn of the century London setting in a major city. There's like also this convoluted plan to figure out who the bad guy is and his place in the royal court. Doing this is supposed to hurt this bad guild in some way, shape, or form. But it's never really explained how it's supposed to hurt them, and there's really no resolution in that respect of like, getting revenge for his brother. The story also has one of the most annoying endings I've read in a very long time. Like, I'm not going to spoil it for you folks, but when I read that ending, there was some serious eye rolling. It's a very unoriginal ending, and it also uses information for this last minute twist that is never mentioned anywhere else in the entire story. So it's like, in my opinion, it would be like the end of the Matrix. At the end of Matrix 1, when Neo's facing like Agent Smith. Agent Smith suddenly saying, "Oh no, Neo, you can't hurt us because we've been protecting you guys from aliens that have been trying to destroy Earth for such a long time, even though we're like super evil and bad." And then Neo's suddenly saying, "Oh, well, we should fight them together." And then them going off into like fight aliens for some reason. It's that weird of a twist in that it doesn't make sense. It doesn't, there's no information that sets it up in advance. So like I said, it's an eye roll for me when I read it. But the most frustrating part of this novel is that it sets up some rather decent game mechanics, but then it kind of ignores them whenever the story wants to. There's also some decisions, again, that the main character makes that just don't make sense for the character, or even like game logic wise. And I'll give you some examples. Early in the story, about 20% in, the main character makes a decision to do everything he can to keep his mission a secret. Remember, he's trying to infiltrate the evil guild who hurt his brother potentially and destroy them. So it makes sense. He was an assassin. He's used to stealth stuff. However, he meets a woman and he helps defend her from like some slimes. And he even goes as far as like when he's talking to her, thinking to himself, saying, in my job, I had to learn ways to keep on my toes and never just open up to anyone with information. You never know what's going to come bite you in the butt. And the very next thing that he does, he tells this lady his entire plan to infiltrate the bad guys guild. I'm like, you just said, and then you did. And I'm like, those are different things. Then I'm like, so it's a frustrating thing. And this happens quite a few times in the story. Additionally, there are like game mechanic inconsistencies that the author just either chose to ignore or do intentionally. For example, during character creation for the main character, it's firmly established by the author that the main character's real life skills do not transfer to the game. He has to build up these skills. He has to earn them in the game. He can't just even though he's an awesome assassin in real life, that is not translating in the game. It's not one of those kind of game systems. For example, he shoots a bow and arrow at a slime and he misses a lot because he doesn't have like the bow skill. And when gets his first level, he grabs that skill and now he misses a lot less when he shoots with his bow and arrow. Okay, that's great. It makes total sense. That's a fine setup that has game logic. However, only a couple levels later, the main character is one-shotting wyverns. And if you don't know what that is, think of like a smaller dragon, like the size of a horse, instead of like the size of a house, as a regular dragon would be. And he's killing them with a knife that he doesn't have a skill for. He's just like, stab, dead. And he's also like headshotting with his bow and arrow players that are like 2 to 3 times his level, like, and and that just doesn't make sense for me, game logic wise. He also throughout the story, he suddenly gains skills that his class doesn't have, like things like explosives, stealth, interrogation. Like, yeah, if his real life skills were carrying over, that would make sense, but that's not how the game world was set up. That's not how the game, like the world rules are set up. And so it's just super frustrating because the author seems to be just kind of discarding the things he's built at the drop of a hat because it seems like it might be cool for the story, and sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. And overall, it was a rather frustrating story. Despite the few interesting quests early in the story, I mostly found myself being frustrated by the novel. At the last half really doesn't make sense to me, and the end just kind of pushed me over the edge into dislike. So this novel gets a score of 4 out of 10. It is LitRPG. It's just not. I don't like it, so it is what it is. So there you go. On to our last review, Black Hat, Afterlife Online, Book 2, written by Domino Finn. Okay, this one is 365 pages. It is $5.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. I will read you the author's description. By the way, this is the sequel to the very popular LitRPG novel, Reboot. So there you go. That particular novel got a 7 out of 10 from us. Author's description. Life's a grind. Living in a virtual game world sounds like the ultimate dream. Plenty of action, intrigue, and guess who gets to be the big hero? But what happens when the digital reality finally gets flipped on its head? Bad guys are after your sweet loot, and your fancy title is loaded with unrealistic expectations, and achieving such a high level comes with a big fat target on your back. It isn't long before Talon and company learn that in an MMO, the daily grind is a literal fact of life. Something has to give, so when a new Crusader faction rolls into town, Talon senses an opportunity, not just to get out of Dodge, but to navigate unforgiving terrain onto the edge of the world where he can make a difference, have a real impact, and be a real hero. The catch, an awakened dragon, a city of cutthroats, and a mystical executioner with a sharpened axe to grind. Welcome to the first few of a very long days. Okay, again, this is a sequel to Reboot. Overall, this is a really decent action adventure story. However, there are some issues I had with the novel that are still here, and there are some new ones with it as well. First of all, there are even more religious overtones of the story. So if that bothers you, don't read this. It's going to get worse. There's a whole new faction of Crusaders and a bigoted priest, in addition to the Lucifer, the Saints, and the Pagans, which were the monsters. So it is what it is. But it is more pronounced in this novel than it was in the first one. Also, the plot for the entire first half of the novel feels absolutely forced. The main character is practically bound and gagged and shoved down a story path. And he kind of goes along with it without much questioning. And that kind of bothered me because it didn't make sense for the character, to me at least. The story gets a little more interesting after the 50% mark. I should say it gets a little more fluid. Like the things that the main character does make more sense based on the things he did in book one. But again, that first half it felt like the main character is just being dragged along by his nose. And like, it bothered me personally. But even the twists like in the second half of the novel aren't like super surprising. The bad guy that you were chasing after, not the bad guy, and the supposed good guy you hated actually turns out to be the bad guy. Not a real surprise. Part of my review for book one was based on the fact that I really did like the potential depth of the game mechanics. Quoting it, I say, one of the places the story shines is the potential is in the potential depth of the game mechanics, and the author's background as a real life game designer show through there. Again, I liked the depth of game mechanics in the first book. I thought they were interesting. I thought they had a lot of potential. And that all sort of disappears in book two. There's still enough RPG mechanics there that it is still LitRPG. But I can tell you that the RPG mechanics take a serious backseat in this novel. There are only a handful of XP examples. Most of the game notifications are related to the fight scenes. And there's a really big shift from what I love about book one, which is that game stuff. For the example, the main character goes from level 1 to 8 in book 1. Lots of character progression, right? In book 2, he gets to level 9 at the beginning of the story, and he doesn't gain another level for the entire book. Another example is the fact that the only time you see a character sheet for reference, so like where the main character is at the very end of the book when everything's already done. It really would have been nice to see something in the beginning, so you kind of have a place to start at and as a reference point for where the main character is. And it also would have made the very few XP gains in this entire novel have some context, because you can see, compared to what he started at, this is what it is, and so it's good or it's bad or whatever. But you don't actually get that context, unfortunately. A concrete example of the differences between the two novels, like how much game mechanics were kind of lost in book 2, are the references to XP being awarded. In book 1, there are 26 references to XP being awarded. In book 2, there are 6. That's a big difference. And that's just one example. And again, that just kind of shows, to me, I'm not saying that a novel has to have a certain number of any of these things in any way, shape, or form to be good or bad or whatever. It's just a concrete example of saying the RPG mechanics aren't as important in the story as they were in book 1, nor are they as detailed or as frequent. That's all it is. I don't want you to think there's nothing good about the novel or the story. Like I said, there's lots of action. There's lots of adventure. There's a good amount of gamer jokes and some very funny, legitimately funny scenes. Like there are a couple scenes that I was laughing a lot about, especially ones with barmaids or friends transforming into hot, chesty chicks. I'll say I laughed at those a lot. Overall, while I enjoyed the story, the plotline that felt forced, coupled with like severely minimal RPG mechanics, made this less entertaining than book 1 for me. And so for that reason, it gets a slightly worse score. Like I said, book 1 got a 7 out of 10. This one's going to get a 6 out of 10. It just wasn't as good for me. So there you go. That's it. Finished. Done. That's it, everybody. Thank you very much for watching and hanging out with me. If you want to follow us, you can do so at Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Patreon, where all the links in the show notes, or you can just go to LitRPGPodcast.com/support for all the ways you can support the podcast if you want to do so. But again, thank you very much for hanging out with me in my home. I always like to think I'm bringing you into my home and we're talking about something we both love, LitRPG. And until we can hang it again, folks, though, remember to go read some LitRPG. Goodbye, everybody.